Everyone looked at the dirty coat. No one looked at the man wearing it. When he walked into that high-end diner on a rainy Tuesday, the manager wanted to call the police. The customers held their breath, clutching their designer bags. But one waitress broke, exhausted, and risking her job saw something else. She saw a human being. She served him a hot meal and paid for it with her last $10. She thought she was just helping a homeless stranger. She had no idea that the man shaking her hand was Harrison Sterling, the missing billionaire tycoon who had vanished 3 years ago. And what he left her on the table wasn't just a tip, it was a war. The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime stick harder. It was a Tuesday in November, the kind of day where the sky looks like a bruised plum, and the wind cuts right through the seams of a cheap polyester uniform. Helen Bennett stood behind the counter of the Silver Spoon, a diner that sat awkwardly on the border between the gentrified tech district and the old, crumbling industrial blocks. Her feet throbbed. It was a specific, rhythmic pain that radiated from her arches up to her knees, a reminder that she was 6 hours into a double shift, with 4 hours left to go. She checked her phone surreptitiously beneath the counter. No text from the babysitter. That was good. No news was good news when your 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was fighting a respiratory condition that the doctors couldn't quite pin down, but the billing department certainly could. Bennett, if you have time to lean, you have time to clean. The voice cracked like a whip. Rick, the manager, waddled out of the kitchen. Rick was a man who sweated grease. He wore a tie that was too short and a worldview that was too small. He hated the homeless. He hated students who ordered just coffee. And most of all, he seemed to hate Helen. I'm checking on my daughter. Rick, Helen said, shoving the phone into her apron pocket, right next to the $3 in tips she'd made so far. She has a nebulizer treatment at 2. I don't pay you to be a mother. I pay you to serve tables, Rick sneered, wiping his forehead with the back of a hairy hand. Table 4 needs a refill. Table 7 is waiting on the check. Move it. Helen swallowed the sharp retort burning her throat. She couldn't lose this job. The Silver Spoon wasn't a 5-star establishment, but the tips were steady enough to keep the lights on in her studio apartment, provided she didn't eat lunch. The diner was busy. It was the lunch rush. Tech bros in Patagonia vests were loud at the booths, discussing stock options and crypto wallets. A couple of tourists were complaining about the humidity. The air smelled of burnt bacon and expensive coffee. Then, the door chime rang. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was a hard pivot. The chatter died down. Heads turned. A man stood in the entryway. He was soaking wet. Water dripped from the brim of a hat that had lost its shape a decade ago. He wore an oversized military surplus coat that was stained with mud and oil. His beard was a tangled gray thicket, and his shoes were held together with silver duct tape. He looked like debris the storm had blown in. He stood there, shivering, clutching a plastic bag against his chest. He didn't look dangerous. He looked defeated. Rick was around the counter in a second, puffing his chest out like a bantam rooster. Hey! Hey! You! Rick shouted, pointing a sausage-like finger at the door. No, absolutely not. Turn around. We don't want your kind here. The old man blinked, his eyes watery and blue, stark against his weathered skin. I just want a coffee, he rasped. His voice sounded like dry leaves scraping on pavement. I have money. He reached into a pocket with shaking hands and pulled out a handful of wet coins. Quarters, dimes, pennies. I don't care if you have gold bars. Rick spat, stepping into the old man's personal space. This is a private establishment. You're scaring the customers. Get out before I call the cops. At table 5, a woman in a beige business suit wrinkled her nose. Seriously, she muttered loud enough to be heard. It smells like wet dog. Helen felt a heat rise in her chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen ovens. It was the same heat she felt when the pharmacy told her Lily's inhaler wasn't covered by insurance. It was the rage of the helpless, watching the helpless. She slammed the coffee pot down on the warmer. Rick, stop, Helen said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. Rick spun around, his face turning a mottled shade of red. Excuse me? He's soaking wet, Helen said, walking out from behind the counter. She ignored the stares of the tech bros. She ignored the frantic signaling of the other waitress, Jenny, who was mouthing, "Don't do it, Helen." "I said get out," Rick barked at the old man, reaching out to grab the man's arm. "Don't touch him." Helen stepped between them. She was 5'4", but in that moment, she felt 10 feet tall. Table 12 is open in the back corner. "I'll take him." "You seat him, you're fired," Rick hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Helen looked at Rick. She thought about the rent due in 3 days. She thought about Lily's cough. Then she looked at the old man's hands. They were trembling. Not from cold, she realized, but from Parkinson's or something like it. "Then fire me after I serve him," Helen said. "But you're not throwing an old man out into a storm." She turned to the man and softened her expression. "Sir, my name is Helen. Come with me." The old man looked at her, and for a second, the fog in his eyes cleared. He looked at her not as a waitress, but as if he were memorizing her face. "Thank you, child," he whispered. Helen guided him to the booth in the far back. It was near the kitchen doors, noisy and drafty, but it was private. She grabbed a clean towel from her apron and handed it to him. "Dry off," she said gently. "What can I get you? Coffee?" "Coffee would be wonderful," he said, taking the towel. He didn't wipe his face. He wiped the plastic bag he was holding first. He treated that bag like it held the crown jewels. "And are the pancakes expensive?" Helen looked at the menu. The pancakes were $14.99. She looked at the wet coins on the table. He had maybe $2. "They're on special today," Helen lied. $1. The old man smiled. It was a crooked smile, missing a tooth on the side, but it lit up his face. "I'll have the blueberry ones, please." Helen went to the kitchen. Rick was standing by the pass, his arms crossed. "You pay for that. Full price. And don't expect to be on the schedule next week, Bennett." "Put it on my tab," Helen said, punching the order in. That was $15. That was 2 hours of work. She felt a pit in her stomach, but she pushed it down. When she brought the coffee and the pancakes, the old man was staring out the window at the rain. "Bad weather," he said as she poured the coffee. "It's Seattle," Helen smiled. "It keeps the plants green," he chuckled. "You have a good spirit, Helen. Most people look at the rain and see mud. You see life." He took a shaky sip of the coffee. "Why did you help me? Your boss. He seems like a difficult man." Helen sighed, leaning against the booth for a second. The rush had calmed down slightly. "Rick? Rick is just scared. He thinks if he lets one person in, he loses control. I don't know. And you? Are you not scared?" "I'm terrified," Helen admitted. She didn't know why she was telling him this. Maybe it was because he was a stranger. Maybe it was because he had kind eyes. "I have a little girl. She's sick. I need this job. But my dad used to say that you can tell the measure of a man by how he treats someone who can do him no good. I couldn't let you stand out there." The old man stopped eating. He put his fork down. "A sick daughter?" "Yeah. Lily? She's a fighter, though." Helen checked her watch. "I have to get back to the other tables." "Enjoy the pancakes." She walked away, missing the look the old man gave her. It was a look of profound calculation. For the next hour, Helen worked double time. She ran food. She refilled drinks. She smiled at rude customers. Rick watched her like a hawk, waiting for a mistake. The old man ate slowly. He savored every bite. When he was finished, he waved Helen over. "I have to go," he said. He pushed the pile of wet coins toward her. "This is for the meal." "Keep it," Helen whispered, pushing the coins back. "Buy yourself a hot dinner tonight." He looked at her hand on his. His skin was rough, like sandpaper. "You paid for me? Don't worry about it." "Helen," he said, his voice suddenly sharp, clear, and commanding. It startled her. "What is your last name?" "Bennett," she said automatically. "And where do you live, Helen Bennett?" Over on 4th and Pine." The brick building. She frowned. Why? Just an old man's curiosity. He stood up. He was taller than he looked when he was hunched over. He reached into his plastic bag and pulled out a dirty, crumpled napkin. He scribbled something on it with a stubby pencil. I don't have money for a tip, he said. But I have this. He pressed the napkin into her hand. Take care of Lily, he said. And then he walked out. He didn't hunch. He didn't shuffle. He walked out with a stride that cut through the diner's atmosphere like a knife. Helen looked at the napkin. On it, written in shaky but elegant cursive, was a series of numbers and a name. Arthur. And below that, a sentence. The wolf cares not for the opinion of the sheep. Weird, Helen muttered. She crumpled the napkin and shoved it into her pocket, turning back to clean the table. She didn't know that the man who had just left wasn't Arthur the bum. He was Harrison Arthur Sterling. 3 years ago, Harrison Sterling was the CEO of Sterling Heavy Industries, a global logistics and shipping conglomerate worth $400 billion. He was known as the Iron Ghost because he rarely gave interviews and ruthlessly acquired competitors. Then, his son and daughter-in-law died in a plane crash. Harrison broke. He vanished. The board of directors claimed he was on sabbatical at a private island. The truth was, he had suffered a breakdown. He wandered. He wanted to see if anyone would treat him like a human being, if he stripped away the power, the money, and the name. For 3 years, no one had. Until Helen. But the drama was just beginning. Because Harrison Sterling didn't just walk out of the diner to disappear again. He walked out to make a phone call. And Helen was about to pay the price for her kindness before she reaped the reward. Bennett, Rick screamed from the front. Office. Now, Helen's heart hammered against her ribs. She walked to the back office, a cramped room that smelled of stale cigarettes. Rick was sitting behind his desk, looking smug. You disobeyed a direct order, Rick said, leaning back. You gave free food to a vagrant. That's theft. I paid for it, Helen said, her voice trembling. Check the till. I put my own money in. Doesn't matter. It's the principle. You undermined my authority in front of customers. Rick smiled, a cruel, tight expression. You're fired, Helen. Get your stuff. And don't expect a reference. Rick, please, Helen begged, thinking of the inhaler. I have rent on Tuesday. Lily, not my problem. Get out. Helen stumbled out of the office. She felt numb. The diner sounds the clinking cutlery. The laughter sounded underwater. She went to her locker, grabbed her purse, and walked out the back door into the rain. She stood in the alleyway, the water soaking her hair, and she cried. She cried for the unfairness of it. She cried for the $10 she spent on pancakes she couldn't afford. She cried because she was a good person, and it seemed like being a good person was the fastest way to ruin. She didn't see the black SUV roll slowly past the alley entrance. She didn't see the man in the back seat watching her. Sir? The driver asked the man in the back. Do we intervene? Harrison Sterling, now wearing a clean, dry robe in the back of his armored Maybach, watched the crying waitress. His eyes were cold, calculating, and furious. But not at her. Not yet, Harrison said. First, we need to clear the board. Get me the legal team. Get me the file on the Silver Spoon. I want to know who owns the building, who owns the debt, and who insures them. You want to buy the diner, sir? No, Harrison said. I want to destroy it, and then I want to build her a kingdom. The bus ride home was a blur of neon lights smearing against wet glass. Helen sat in the back, her uniform damp and clinging to her skin. She clutched her purse tight, her knuckles white. She had $42 in her bank account. Rent was $1,200. When she unlocked the door to her small apartment, the air was thick and warm, smelling of vapor rub and damp wool. Her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was asleep in the armchair, a book resting on her chest. Helen, Mrs. Gable woke with a start, adjusting her glasses. You're home early. They let me go, Helen whispered, hanging her coat on the hook. She couldn't look the old woman in the eye. Mrs. Gable watched Lily for free because she was lonely, But Helen felt the weight of the imposition every single day. "Oh, honey. No." Mrs. Gable stood up, her joints popping. "Was it Rick?" "It's always Rick." Helen walked over to the small bedroom door and cracked it open. Lily was asleep, but her breathing was ragged. A wheezing whistle accompanied every exhale. The sound tore through Helen's heart like shrapnel. Beside the bed sat the nebulizer, the plastic tubing coiled like a snake. The medicine vial next to it was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in Helen's chest. "Mrs. Gable," Helen asked, her voice trembling. "Did she take the last dose?" "She had a coughing fit around noon," Mrs. Gable said gently. "I had to give it to her. I thought you were bringing the refill tonight." Helen felt the blood drain from her face. The refill cost $80, without insurance. She had $42. And no job. I have to go out," Helen said, grabbing her purse again. "Helen, it's pouring out there. You're exhausted. She needs the medicine." Helen ran back out into the rain. She didn't take the bus this time. She ran to the pharmacy 3 blocks away, splashing through puddles, the water soaking into her cheap sneakers. The pharmacy was bright, fluorescent, and sterile. The pharmacist, a man named Greg who knew her situation, looked sympathetic but helpless. "It's $86.50, Helen," Greg said, looking at the screen. "Prices went up this quarter." Helen placed her debit card on the counter. "Run it. Please. Maybe it will go through." She knew how overdrafts worked. She knew the bank would charge her a $35 fee for the privilege of being poor, pushing her further into the hole. But she didn't care. She just needed the vial. Beep. Declined. The red letters on the card reader mocked her. "Try it again," Helen begged. "Please, Greg. It's for Lily. She's wheezing." "Helen, I can't," Greg whispered, looking around to make sure his manager wasn't watching. "The system won't let me dispense without payment. It's inventory tracked." Helen stood there, dripping wet, shaking. She looked at the candy bars near the register. She looked at the magazines promising 10 ways to be happy. She felt a scream building in her throat, a primal sound of a mother who couldn't protect her child. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. The napkin. "Arthur, 555-0199. She pulled it out. It was ridiculous. It was a homeless man's scribble. What was he going to do? Give her a half-eaten sandwich? But desperation makes people do irrational things. "Greg," Helen said, her voice hollow, "can I use the store phone?" "My battery died." Greg nodded and slid the landline over the counter. Helen dialed the number. She didn't expect an answer. She expected a disconnect message, or maybe a shelter. "Ring, ring." "Sterling Residence," a voice answered. It wasn't the old man. It was a crisp, British accent, smooth, professional, and terrifyingly calm. Helen froze. I'm calling for Arthur?" There was a pause on the other end. A silence so heavy it felt like the line had been cut. "Who is calling?" the voice asked, sharper this time. "Helen Bennett, from the diner. He gave me this number." "Hold, please." The line clicked. Helen waited. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Greg was looking at her with pity. Then, a voice came on the line. It wasn't the British man. It was him. But the voice wasn't raspy anymore. It was strong. "Helen? Arthur?" she whispered. I don't know why I'm calling. I lost my job. Lily needs medicine, and my card was declined, and I don't know what to do." She broke down, the tears finally spilling over in the middle of the pharmacy. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called. Where are you?" The question was a command. "The CVS on 4th. Stay there." "Arthur, I can't stay. I have to go find Helen." The voice was iron. "Do not leave that store. Give the phone to the pharmacist." "What?" "Give the phone to the man behind the counter." Now, trembling, Helen handed the phone to Greg. "He wants to talk to you." Greg looked confused. He took the receiver. "Hello?" "Look," She's just upset we're not. Greg stopped talking. His eyes went wide. He stood up straighter. Yes, sir. I understand. Yes, I can do that. Are you serious? Yes, of course. I'll print the receipt immediately. Greg hung up the phone slowly, looking at it as if it had turned into gold. He looked at Helen with a mixture of awe and fear. What? Helen asked. What did he say? Greg didn't answer. He turned to his computer, typed furiously, and then went to the shelf. He grabbed the medicine. Then he grabbed 2 more boxes. Then he grabbed a bottle of children's vitamins. He put them in a bag and handed them to her. It's paid for, Greg said. What? He gave me a credit card number over the phone. A black Amex. And... Greg swallowed hard. He said to open a store credit account in your name. Unlimited cap. He said if you need anything, diapers, food, medicine, you take it. Helen stared at the bag. Who is he, Greg? I don't know, Greg said, wiping sweat from his forehead. But the name on the card wasn't Arthur. It was Sterling. While Helen was running through the rain with the medicine clutched to her chest, a different kind of storm was brewing in the penthouse of the Obsidian Tower, the tallest building in the city. Harrison Sterling stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror. The beard was gone. A team of barbers had spent an hour shaving him, applying hot towels, and trimming his hair. The dirty military coat was in the trash. In its place, Harrison wore a bespoke navy suit that cost more than the Silver Spoon diner made in a year. His cufflinks were platinum. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. He looked 10 years younger. The vulnerability was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, predatory intelligence. The Iron Ghost had returned. His personal assistant, the man with the British accent named Alfred, stood by the door holding a tablet. The girl has the medicine, sir, Alfred said. We also arranged for a car to watch her building tonight, just in case. Good, Harrison said, adjusting his tie. Now, bring me the file on Rick. Alfred tapped the tablet and projected an image onto the smart glass of the wall. It was a dossier on Richard Rick Slater. Richard Slater, Alfred read, manager of the Silver Spoon for 6 years. Petty criminal record, 2 DUIs, 1 assault charge dropped due to lack of evidence. He's been skimming from the diner's inventory to sell to a catering buddy on the side. The diner is owned by a holding company called Apex Dining, which is a subsidiary of Goliath Ventures. Harrison smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Goliath Ventures. That's run by Marcus Vane, isn't it? Yes, sir. Your old rival? Vane is a shark, Harrison mused, but sharks forget how to swim when the water drains out. Harrison turned to the window, looking out over the city he helped build. I walked the streets for 3 years, Alfred. I saw how men like Rick treat the world because they think no one is watching. They think power is screaming at a waitress. They don't understand what real power is. And what is real power, sir? Real power is silence, Harrison said. Get the legal team. We aren't just buying the diner. I want to buy the debt of Goliath Ventures. All of it. Sir, Alfred hesitated. Goliath is massive. Their debt exposure is in the billions. To buy it, you'd have to liquidate the reserves. The board will panic. Let them panic, Harrison snapped. I am the majority shareholder. Initiate the hostile takeover. By tomorrow morning, I want to own the mortgage on Rick's house, the lease on his car, and the deed to the restaurant he manages. I want to own the air he breathes. As you wish, sir. Harrison walked to his desk. It was an expansive slab of black marble. He sat down, the leather chair creaking softly. He picked up a framed photo of his late son. I found one, son, he whispered to the photo. I found a person who is good. He set the photo down and picked up the phone. Connect me to the mayor, Harrison commanded. Tell him the ghost is back. And tell him I have a sanitation problem in his city that I intend to fix personally. The next morning, the sun rose. But for Rick Slater, the world was about to go dark. Rick arrived at the Silver Spoon at 7 a.m. Hungover and angry, he kicked the back door open. Bennett, he shouted out of habit, then remembered he had fired her. Jenny, coffee, now. Jenny, The other waitress scurried over with a pot. She looked terrified. "Where's the morning prep?" Rick barked, slamming his hand on the counter. "Why are the floors dirty?" "We're short-staffed, Rick," Jenny said quietly. "Since you fired Helen." "Don't say her name," Rick yelled. "She was a charity case. I did us a favor." The front door chimed. "We're closed," Rick shouted without looking up. "Open at 8. "I believe," a deep voice rumbled, "that you are open for me." Rick looked up. 3 men in dark suits stood in the entrance. They were massive. Security detail. Behind them walked a man who radiated authority like a blast furnace. Harrison Sterling didn't look like the homeless man anymore. Rick didn't recognize him. All Rick saw was money. "Who are you?" Rick asked, his voice wavering slightly. "Health inspector?" Harrison stepped forward. He walked slowly, inspecting the diner. He ran a finger along a table, checked for dust, and looked at his finger with disgust. "I am the new owner," Harrison said calmly. Rick laughed nervously. "What? No way. Apex Dining owns this place. I know the VP. He wouldn't sell without telling me. Apex Dining no longer exists as an independent entity as of 4 a.m. this morning," Harrison said. He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and dropped it on the counter. "It has been absorbed by Sterling Heavy Industries." Rick's face went pale. Everyone knew the name Sterling. "Okay. Well," Rick stammered, trying to straighten his tie. "Mr. Sterling, an honor. I'm Rick Slater, the general manager. I run a tight ship here. If you're looking for efficiency—" "I'm not looking for efficiency, Mr. Slater," Harrison interrupted. "I'm looking for a waitress named Helen Bennett." Rick froze. The color drained completely from his face. "Helen?" Rick squeaked. She didn't work out. Personnel issue. Theft. I had to let her go." Harrison stared at Rick. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. It was agonizing. "Theft?" Harrison repeated softly. Yes, Rick lied, gaining confidence. "She was stealing food, giving free meals to bums. You know the type. Dangerous characters. I did it to protect the brand, sir." Harrison's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer to Rick. "I was the bum, Rick." The air left the room. Jenny gasped. Rick's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Harrison's blue eyes, the same blue eyes of the old man he had tried to throw out into the rain. "You?" Rick whispered. "Me," Harrison said. "And she didn't steal. She paid for my meal with her own money. Money she needed for her sick child. She gave everything she had to a stranger. While you—" Harrison leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You stand here in your cheap tie and judge the world. You fired a mother for showing compassion. I didn't know it was you," Rick pleaded, backing away until he hit the soda machine. "Sir, please. If I knew it was you, I would have given you the best table. I would have comped the meal." "That," Harrison said, straightening up, "is exactly the problem. You only treat people with respect if you think they have power. Which means you have no honor." Harrison snapped his fingers. 2 of the security guards stepped forward. "Escort Mr. Slater off the premises," Harrison commanded. "You can't do this," Rick screamed as the guards grabbed his arms. "I have rights. I have a contract." "Check your bank account, Rick," Harrison said coldly. "I bought your car loan this morning," I called in the note. "They're towing your Honda right now. And your landlord? He just sold your building to me. You have 24 hours to vacate your apartment. You're ruining my life," Rick shrieked as he was dragged toward the door. "No," Harrison said, turning his back on him. "I'm just balancing the books." As Rick was thrown out onto the sidewalk, Harrison turned to Jenny. She was shaking, holding the coffee pot. What about me?" she asked, terrified. Harrison smiled gently. It was the smile of Arthur. "Do you know where Helen lives?" "Yes, sir." "Close the diner," Harrison said. "We are going to pay her a visit. And Jenny?" "Yes?" "Throw out the menus. We're changing everything." Helen Bennett was sitting on her living room floor, surrounded by half-packed cardboard boxes. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She hadn't slept. The adrenaline of the pharmacy incident had worn off, leaving behind a cold dread. Yes, the medicine was paid for a miracle. She still couldn't comprehend, but she was still unemployed. The rent was still due. The eviction notice from the landlord, Mr. Henderson, was likely already in the mail. Lily was sitting on the sofa, breathing easier, coloring in a book. The wheezing had stopped. The medicine worked fast. "Mommy?" Lily asked, not looking up from her crayon drawing. "Why are we putting things in boxes? Are we going on an adventure?" Helen choked back a sob. She forced a smile, though her lips trembled. "Maybe, baby, we might have to move to a cozier place. Smaller, cozier." Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't the aggressive banging of a landlord demanding rent. It was 3 solid, rhythmic raps. Helen froze. She smoothed her hair, which was pulled back in a messy bun, and walked to the door. She opened it a crack, keeping the chain on. Standing in the hallway was a man in a suit so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. He was British, holding a tablet. This was Alfred. "Miss Helen Bennett?" Alfred asked. "Yes," Helen said, her heart pounding. "If this is about the rent..." I am not here for the rent, madam," Alfred said kindly. "I am here to announce a guest." Alfred stepped aside. Behind him stood a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of Forbes. He wore a charcoal wool coat over a navy suit. He held a cane with a silver handle, though he didn't seem to need it. Helen looked at him. She saw the expensive clothes. She saw the power radiating off him. She didn't know him. Then, she looked at his eyes. Blue, watery, sad. The memory of the diner flashed in her mind. The old man shivering in the booth, the way he looked at the pancakes. "Arthur?" Helen breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Harrison Sterling offered a small, crooked smile, the same smile from the diner. "Hello, Helen. May we come in?" Helen undid the chain with trembling fingers. She opened the door wide. The contrast between the billionaire and her tiny, run-down apartment was stark. Harrison stepped inside, his polished shoes resting on her worn-out carpet. He looked around. He saw the peeling wallpaper. He saw the nebulizer on the table. He saw the boxes. "You're packing," Harrison said softly. "I lost my job," Helen said, feeling a sudden wave of shame. "I can't afford this place anymore." "Arthur, who are you?" Harrison turned to her. He took off his hat. "My name is Harrison Sterling. But to you, I hope I can remain Arthur." "Sterling?" Helen gasped. "The shipping company? The billionaire?" "That is what the magazines say," Harrison said. He walked over to the sofa where Lily was watching him with wide eyes. Most billionaires would be uncomfortable in a place like this. Harrison looked like he was in a cathedral. He knelt down on one knee, ruining the crease of his $1,000 trousers to be at eye level with Lily. "Hello," Harrison said gently. "You must be Lily. You look like a movie star," Lily said bluntly. Harrison laughed, a genuine, deep sound. "And you look like a princess. Are you feeling better?" "My chest doesn't hurt anymore," Lily said. "Mommy got the magic medicine." Harrison looked up at Helen. His eyes were swimming with emotion. "I had a son once," he whispered to Helen. "He had asthma when he was little. I remember the sound of that machine. I remember the fear." He stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. "Helen," he said, his voice firming up. "I went undercover for 3 years because I lost my faith in humanity. I wanted to see if anyone would care about a man who had nothing to offer. I was spat on. I was kicked. I was ignored by thousands of people." He took a step toward her. "You were the only one who stopped. You fed me when you were hungry. You defended me when you were at risk. You gave me your last dollar. I just did what was right," Helen said, tears streaming down her face. "And that is why I am here," Harrison said. "Because right is a rare currency these days, and I intend to invest in it." He snapped his fingers. Alfred stepped forward and handed Harrison a thick black folder. "Helen, please sit down," Harrison said. "We have business to discuss." Helen sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching Lily's hand. Harrison sat in the armchair where Mrs. Gable usually slept. First, Harrison said, opening the folder. The immediate concerns. He pulled out a check. He placed it on the coffee table. Helen looked at it. It was a cashier's check, written to Helen Bennett. The amount was $50,000. Helen gasped. I can't take this. Arthur, Mr. Sterling, this is crazy. This is back pay, Harrison said dismissively. Consider it a consulting fee for reminding me who I am. It covers your rent for the next, well, for a long time. But that is just the beginning. He pulled out a second document. It was a legal deed. Do you know who owns the building we are sitting in? Harrison asked. Mr. Henderson, Helen said. Not anymore, Harrison said. I bought the building this morning. Mr. Henderson was persuaded to sell. I don't like being a landlord, Helen. It's tedious. So, I transferred the deed. He slid the paper toward her. This building is yours. The whole thing. 6 units. You can live here, rent the others out, or burn it down. It's up to you. Helen couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. Why? She choked out. Why are you doing this? Because, Harrison said, his voice dropping low, I have more money than God, Helen, but I realized yesterday that I was poorer than you. You have a heart. I had forgotten how to use mine. But wait, Harrison continued, raising a hand before she could argue. The most important part is next. He pulled out a glossy brochure. It was for the Sterling Institute for Pediatric Pulmonology, one of the top hospitals in the world, located in Switzerland, with a branch in Seattle. I have arranged for Lily to see Dr. Eris Thorne. He is the best specialist in the country. Her treatment, whatever she needs, surgeries, therapy, medication, is covered. For life. By the Sterling Trust. Helen looked at Lily. She looked at the check. She looked at the deed. The weight of the world, the crushing pressure she had carried on her shoulders for 6 years, suddenly vanished. She burst into tears. Ugly, racking sobs of relief. Harrison sat patiently, watching her. He didn't look away. He let her release the pain. When she finally quieted down, wiping her eyes with her sleeve, Harrison stood up. Now, he said briskly, shifting back to the CEO persona. Wash your face. Put on your uniform. Helen blinked, confused. My uniform? Yes, Harrison said. We are going to the Silver Spoon. But Rick fired me. Rick is currently trying to figure out how to pay for a bus ticket, Harrison said with a dark smile. And the Silver Spoon has a staffing problem. It lacks a manager. You want me to manage the diner? Helen asked. No, Harrison said. He walked to the door and held it open. I don't want you to manage it. I want you to own it. 20 minutes later, a black Maybach pulled up to the curb of the Silver Spoon. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the gray Seattle clouds. A crowd had gathered. The rumor mill in the neighborhood moved fast. People had seen the limousines. They had seen Rick being thrown out by security. Helen stepped out of the car. She was wearing her waitress uniform, but she felt different. She felt steady. Harrison offered her his arm. They walked through the front door together. The diner was silent. The staff, Jenny, the cook, Marcos, and the dishwasher were standing in a line, looking terrified. They didn't know what was happening. Harrison walked to the center of the room. He tapped his cane on the floor to get attention. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison boomed. His voice filled the room. May I have your attention? The customers, some of whom were the same tech bros from the day before, looked up from their phones. My name is Harrison Sterling, he announced. A ripple of whispers went through the room. Yesterday, I came into this establishment as a beggar. I was insulted. I was almost thrown out. But one person here saw a human being instead of a nuisance. He turned to Helen. Helen Bennett, Harrison said. Step forward. Helen stepped up. Her face was red, but she held her head high. This woman, Harrison said, addressing the room, is the new owner of the Silver Spoon, and not just this location. I have acquired the parent company, Apex Dining. Helen Bennett is now the owner of the entire chain of 12 restaurants in the Pacific Northwest. Jenny gasped. Marcos dropped his spatula. Harrison turned to Helen and handed her a set of keys. You have full autonomy, Harrison said. Change the menu, change the decor, fire the rude customers. But I have one condition. Helen looked at the keys in her hand. They felt heavy. What is the condition? Harrison leaned in close, so only she could hear. There is a table in the back. Table 12. You must keep it open. Always. And if anyone comes in hungry, wet, or broken, you feed them. On the house. That is the rent you pay to me. Helen smiled. It was a smile that lit up the gloomy diner. Deal, she said. Harrison nodded. Then get to work, boss. He turned to leave, his job done. But Helen grabbed his arm. Wait, she said. Harrison stopped. Yes? You didn't finish your pancakes yesterday, she said. Sit down. Table 12. I'm buying. Harrison Sterling, the man who could buy countries, looked at the waitress. He looked at the booth in the back. I suppose I have time for a bite, he said softly. As he sat down, and Helen went behind the counter to tie on her apron, the diner erupted in applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. But the story wasn't quite over. Because while Helen had won the battle, the war Harrison had mentioned was about to arrive in the form of his estranged, greedy nephew, who had just seen the news and was currently screaming into his phone in a skyscraper across town. He gave the company to a waitress? Get the lawyers. I want him declared insane. Now, the peace at the Silver Spoon lasted exactly 72 hours. In those 3 days, Helen had transformed the atmosphere. The grease was scrubbed away. The broken jukebox was fixed. The Table 12 sign was engraved in brass. The diner was packed, not just with tech workers, but with people from the neighborhood who had heard the story. It was becoming a sanctuary. Harrison Sterling had spent every morning there, sitting at Table 12, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, watching Helen work. For the first time in years, he looked at peace. But peace, for men like Harrison Sterling, is often just the eye of the hurricane. It was Friday afternoon. The lunch rush was winding down. Helen was behind the counter, laughing with a regular customer, when the atmosphere in the room curdled. 3 black armored SUVs screeched to a halt outside, blocking the street. The doors flew open, and a phalanx of lawyers in gray suits marched out, flanking a young man who looked like a sharper, crueler version of Harrison. This was Preston Sterling, Harrison's nephew, the man who had been running the empire in Harrison's absence and running it into the ground while lining his own pockets. Preston kicked the door open. He didn't look at the customers. He walked straight to the counter, threw a leather briefcase onto the surface, and slammed his hand down. Where is she? Preston sneered. He had the same blue eyes as Harrison, but where Harrison's were deep ocean, Preston's were shallow ice. Helen wiped her hands on her apron. She didn't flinch. Can I help you? You're the con artist, Preston spat. The waitress who drugged an old man. Excuse me? Helen asked, her voice hard. Preston snapped his fingers. A lawyer stepped forward and slapped a thick stack of papers onto the counter. This is an emergency injunction, the lawyer droned. We have filed a petition with the Supreme Court declaring Harrison Sterling mentally incompetent due to senile dementia and trauma. As his power of attorney is contested, all assets transferred in the last week are frozen pending investigation. That includes this building, the accounts, and the deed to this diner. Preston leaned over the counter, his expensive cologne choking the air. You're done, sweetheart. You think you hit the jackpot? You just stepped into a bear trap. I'm taking it all back. The money, the diner, the hospital funds for your brat. Helen went cold. The hospital funds. Lily's treatment was scheduled to start on Monday. You can't do that, Helen whispered. I just did, Preston grinned. Security. Clear the building. This property is now under the stewardship of the Sterling estate. 2 burly private security contractors moved to grab Jenny and the customers. Get out, Preston screamed at the diners. Everyone out. I wouldn't do that if I were you. A voice rumbled from the back. Preston froze. He looked toward Table 12. Harrison Sterling stood up. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket today. He was wearing a simple cardigan. He looked like a grandfather, but he held his cane like a broadsword. "Uncle Harry," Preston said, his voice dripping with mock pity. "Look at you. Eating with the peasants. It's sad, really. The doctors say your mind is gone. Do they?" Harrison walked slowly toward the front. The room fell deathly silent. "Yes," Preston said, confident in his legal team. "Wandering the streets, giving millions to a waitress. It's classic dementia. We're doing this for your own good, Uncle. We're putting you in a facility, a nice one, in Iceland." Harrison stopped 5 feet from his nephew. He looked at the legal papers on the counter. He looked at Helen, who was trembling with rage, not fear. "Helen," Harrison said calmly, "do you remember what I told you on the napkin?" Helen nodded. "The wolf cares not for the opinion of the sheep." "Preston is not a wolf," Harrison said softly. "He is a hyena. He waits for the lion to sleep, and then he tries to steal the kill." "I am the CEO," Preston shouted, losing his cool. "I control the board. I control the money. You are a ghost, old man." Harrison sighed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, sleek audio recorder. He placed it on the counter, next to the injunction. "Alfred?" Harrison said to the air. From the kitchen, Alfred emerged. But he wasn't holding a coffee pot. He was holding a laptop connected to the diner's TV screens. "Ready, sir," Alfred said. "Play it," Harrison commanded. Alfred hit a key. The screens in the diner flickered to life. It was a video recording, grainy, black and white. It was dated 3 days ago. It showed Preston standing in his office, talking to a man, Rick, the former manager of the Silver Spoon. On screen, Preston was handing Rick a thick envelope of cash. "Keep your mouth shut about my uncle." Preston's voice on the video was clear. "If he comes in, you kick him out. If he dies on the street, it solves all my problems. I need the inheritance tax cleared before the quarter ends. Make sure he doesn't get a warm meal in this zip code." The diner gasped. The customers pulled out their phones, recording the screen. Preston's face turned the color of ash. That's deep fake. That's fake. And this?" Harrison pointed to the audio recorder. "I have been recording every board meeting for 3 years, Preston. Even when I wasn't there. I had bugs in the walls." Harrison stepped closer, his voice rising, shedding the grandfather persona and becoming the titan of industry once again. "You embezzled $40 million from the pension fund. You bribed city officials. And you conspired to endanger the life of a vulnerable person, me." Harrison turned to the lawyers. "Gentlemen," Harrison said to Preston's legal team, "you work for Sterling Industries. I am the majority shareholder. I am firing you, all of you, unless you want to be disbarred for aiding a felon." The lawyers looked at the video. They looked at Harrison. They looked at Preston. They stepped away from Preston as if he were radioactive. "Mr. Sterling," the lead lawyer stammered, We were misinformed by your nephew. We withdraw the injunction." "No," Preston screamed. "You can't. He's crazy." "The only crazy thing," Harrison said, "was thinking you could take what belongs to her." Harrison nodded to the door. Sirens wailed in the distance. The police were already coming. Alfred had called them 10 minutes ago. "Preston Sterling," Harrison said, his voice cold and final. "You are disinherited. You are fired. And you are going to prison." Preston lunged at Harrison. "I'll kill you." But Helen was faster. She vaulted over the counter, grabbed a pitcher of ice water, and smashed it into Preston's face. He stumbled back, blinded and sputtering, slipping on the wet floor and crashing down right at Harrison's feet. Harrison looked down at his nephew. "Clean up on aisle 3, Harrison said. The police burst in. 6 months later. The rain in Seattle was still wet, but inside the Silver Spoon, it was warm and bright. Helen stood at the pass, checking orders. She wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. She wore a tailored blazer and jeans. She looked tired, Running an empire of 12 restaurants was hard work, but she looked happy. In the corner booth, table 12, sat two people. One was Harrison Sterling. He was reviewing blueprints for a new homeless shelter he was building downtown. The other was Lily. She was 7 now. She was coloring. Her breathing was silent. Her lungs were clear. "Arthur?" Lily asked, using the name she preferred. "Yes, Princess? Are you staying for dinner?" "I wouldn't miss it," Harrison said. "It's meatloaf night." Helen walked over to the table. She placed a fresh pot of coffee down. She didn't drop a check. She never would. "How is business, boss?" Harrison asked, looking up. "Profit is up 20%, Helen said. "But we gave away 300 meals this month." "A terrible business model," Harrison said, his eyes twinkling. "I love it." Helen touched his shoulder. "Thank you for everything." Harrison covered her hand with his. "No, Helen, you saved me. All I did was sign the check." Outside, the city kept moving. People rushed by, ignoring the homeless, ignoring the rain, ignoring each other. But inside the diner, the lights were on, and for the first time in a long time, for everyone there, it felt like home. And that is the story of how a single act of kindness changed the history of a city. Helen Bennett didn't know she was serving a billionaire. She didn't know she was fighting for her future. She just knew that a human being was hungry, and that was enough. In a world that tells us to look away, to walk past, to save our money and guard our hearts, Helen reminds us of a powerful truth. Character is how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Harrison Sterling had all the money in the world, but he was bankrupt until he met a waitress who had nothing but a $10 bill and a heart of gold. This story reminds us that you never know who you are talking to. The person you help today could be the person who saves you tomorrow. Or maybe, just maybe, the act of helping is the salvation itself. What would you have done? Would you have risked your job for a stranger? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that good people still exist. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story that matters. Until next time, be kind. You never know who's watching.